everybody, I'm the Drink Pro. Today we're drinking Rabbit Hole Heigold. What's up guys, I'm the Drink Pro. Thanks again for joining me. Before we get started with the review today, I want to make sure that I thank a couple of people who have joined the $12 level of the Patreon account. I got Jeremy Wainscott and Joe Compion and an anonymous donor. Thank all three of you so much. If you don't know, Patreon's a way that you can have a monthly subscription service to access more content. It's not going to replace what I'm doing here on YouTube. I'm still giving you 2 videos a week, but it's an addition where you can get new and interesting things and to help support the show. So enough about that. I want to talk about Rabbit Hole. Now, Rabbit Hole is not a particularly well-known distillery outside of certain circles. They are making bourbon in Kentucky, but they are a relatively new player in the game. I haven't heard a lot about them from a lot of whiskey heads, and the people that I've talked to that have tasted their product didn't really care for it. But this is a new product for 2020. This just recently came out, and they're trying to do something a little different. Rabbit Hole Heigold is a Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey, and that means there are certain restrictions about what can and can't go into the product and how it has to be treated. I won't go through all of them today, but that's definitely going to be the subject of another video to help demonstrate the differences between Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey and other whiskeys that may use bourbon qualities but aren't entirely bourbon. This particular batch is in fact bourbon though, and it's aged 3 years in new charred American oak barrels. The mash bill on this product is actually pretty high rye. You know, the traditional grains that go into whiskey tend to be corn, rye, and barley. There's also sometimes wheat, and then you can get some other creative grains in there as well, but the rye percentage tends to significantly affect the flavor, and this particular mash bill is 75% corn, 20% malted rye, and 5% malted barley, so it's going to be very prominent on the nose. One other thing that's worth noting about this whiskey is that it's 95 proof. Now 100 proof is the bottled and bond level, and typically I float around there or higher in my palate and what I tend to like and taste. But I wanted to try something a little bit lower proof that is a relatively new product so you can get the sense of what else is out there in the world of bourbon that you might be able to find on the shelf but not find a lot of information about. I think that's a fun place to explore in the whiskey world right now because so many people are trying to enter the market and push the boundaries of bourbon whiskey. The label of this bottle actually gives you some really good information. A lot of labels out there don't really explain much about the product, but they explain the mash bill on this, they explain how long it's been in the casks and what kind of casks were used, and they also give you some detail about the actual cooperage that made the wood. The casks are by Kelvin Cooperage, and you know, I don't know much about that particular cooperage, but it's really cool to see that kind of information being disclosed. Transparency is really valuable to me in whiskey, and it's something that's unfortunately not as common as it should be, so I'm really glad to see Rabbit Hole stepping up and putting that kind of information on their label. It's also worth noting that this product is non-chill filtered. At a proof of that low of 74.5, it's interesting to see a non-chill filtered product. I've talked about this before, but once you start getting into 47 or below, you may actually get some sediment in the whiskey. Now, I don't see anything floating around in this particular bottle, but when you non-chill filter at that low of a proof, you really can affect the aesthetic of the whiskey. Now, personally, I don't mind drinking whiskey that's a little grainy if it tastes good, but there is debate out there about how much of an effect non-chill filtering has on the palate. Some people will swear by non-chill filtered products only, and some people don't really care. You know, the chill filtered versus non-chill filtered. I hope in the future to do an episode where I can taste a bottle that's non-chill filtered next to the same product that's chill filtered, but that's really hard to do. Most people tend to do one or the other, and especially when it comes to proofing whiskeys, if you find a non-chill filtered product, they're almost always high proof. So it's kind of fun to understand that difference exists, but it's really hard in practice to taste it side by side and to compare and to decide whether or not it matters to you. For all the talk about transparency, I'm a little bit concerned about one thing with this Rabbit Hole bottle. There isn't any place on the bottle that says this is their distillate, and there's no place on the bottle that says where the distillate comes from. It says it's bottled by the Rabbit Hole Distillery in Louisville, Kentucky, but it never says it's their distillate. I don't have a problem with people sourcing distillate, especially early in the process of opening a distillery when you don't want to release young products and you don't really have the money to put out your own stuff. But this is only a 3-year-old whiskey, so it's pretty young even though it may not be their distillate. Given how much information they're putting on this label, they really should discuss where this whiskey is coming from, if to only say distilled and bottled at the Rabbit Hole Distillery. So let's go ahead and give this Rabbit Hole Heigold a taste. Yeah. Oh, you get this one on the close too. Nice. As I've mentioned before, I've had some friends talk about Rabbit Hole and didn't really feel very positively about it. But I wanted to bring this bottle because I heard it was a new product, I heard it was a good product, and, you know, I want to give people a fair shot. So let's go ahead and nose this whiskey. So the nose on this whiskey isn't particularly interesting, but it smells really good. You get a classic vanilla flavor, very prominent. I think I'm picking up some apple and some cherry notes as well. It's definitely got more fruit than floral. Maybe a hint of cinnamon or some other baking spice, but it's pretty subtle. There's not a whole lot on the nose. It's sweet, it's vanilla, maybe a corn syrup kind of sweetness. It's not honey or brown sugar or anything like that. At least not to me it isn't. I could smell how someone could get brown sugar out of this, but I certainly don't. Wouldn't associate that with brown sugar. One of the interesting things about brown sugar, actually, is that there is light brown sugar and dark brown sugar, and they have different tastes and different smells and different uses. People that don't tend to bake might not recognize the differences between those brown sugars, but if I was going to put a brown sugar label on this, I would say it's light brown sugar and not the dark brown sugar, which is richer and more close to molasses. This is closer to a corn syrup, a light, bright, sugary note. As I keep smelling it, new notes start to arise as well, and that usually happens, especially with a very recent pour. I'm getting a lot of orange and maybe some clove. The vanillin is definitely prominent, though. I did slip up a little bit there and said vanillin. Usually I would just let that go and not address it, but it's kind of fun in this case because the chemical that makes the vanilla smell is called vanillin. So that's just a fun little anecdote that, even though I screwed up, I brought it back and made it worth talking about. Alright, let's go ahead and taste this. Enough jabbering. That high rye mash bill comes out right away. It almost tastes like just a rye whiskey. It's so prominent. But it's not offensive. It's not particularly sharp or sour or any of the notes that can come through with younger whiskeys that haven't been treated properly. It definitely tastes good. That wood bitter is really surprising. You know, you definitely get the rye spice, but I also get this sharp barrel tannin woodiness. It's maybe even like a processed chocolate bitterness. It's pretty noticeable. And then the finish comes out, and you do get some of the chocolate notes. There's definitely some sweetness here, but it smells a lot sweeter than it tastes. There's a hint of maybe a honey right off the bat in the palate, but it quickly goes away and becomes this very rye spice centric, maybe even a wood tannin note focused flavor that kind of evolves into a chocolate as it continues along. There may be a hint of a floral note, very subtly, maybe like a rose petal or rose water. But then when I go back to the nose after tasting it, that rye really comes out. The grain notes become much more prominent on the nose. The grain notes in this actually are quite dominant. They kind of overtake a lot of other elements of the pour. And that's not really a problem if you like a grain-forward whiskey. It's not my favorite in the world, but I do like this. This is a good whiskey. After tasting this a couple times, going back and nosing it, the corn really comes out and the rye comes out. The grains are really prominent. And part of that is because it's such a young whiskey. It hasn't had a lot of time in a barrel to change the flavors away from the grain distillate into a more woody, complex, and wood sugar influenced flavor. That said, it's still very good. And it's got quite a bit of color on it for something that's only been in a barrel for 3 years. If you like a very grain-forward spirit, if you like younger spirits, this is something that could definitely be in your range. It's not real sharp, even at 47.5%. It drinks smoother than that. If you like a rye and you like those younger spirit flavors, I think the Heigold might definitely be something you should look into. It's not particularly expensive around here, although I have seen it for a lot more money than I paid for it. You're not going to pay 100. I would say between 50 and 70, depending on where you are. If you can find this for 50, I would pick it up. I don't know if I would go 70 for it. But the young grain notes are really good, and I don't tend to like the young grain notes. So that tells you that when they made this distillate, they really focused on quality grain flavors. It actually is really well balanced. As much as the rye comes out, there is that hint of honey at the beginning. It goes honey into the rye, into the hints of the barrel bitterness, and then it kind of lingers with this bitter chocolate at the end. Very consistent palate as I keep drinking it, and just becomes more and more balanced on my tongue, and I become more and more familiar with it. I gotta say, I would recommend this pour. It's definitely worth picking up if you can get it for like the $50 range. Like I said, 70 might be pushing it, but it's worth checking out. Thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate every viewer. Like and subscribe. Get me up to 100 subscribers so I can make my URL customized. That makes it a lot easier for people to find me, so it's youtube.com/thedrinkpro. That's what I'm planning to do. I only need 9 more subscribers at the time of this filming to get to that point, so I really appreciate any help you can get. And it's just a click for you guys, but it means the world to me. Thanks so much, and keep drinking like professionals. Cheers, guys.